And then next week, Lord willing, we'll be doing the next principle in the book. So what we're going to look at today is choosing the right discipline tool. And when we look at this, we might think about tools as tangible objects, but this is not necessarily, tangible objects or whatever it may be. We've got to think about effective parenting. We've got to think about how to train our children to obey. And there are many different ways that we can do that. And the first thing we're going to look at is what we call the law of reinforcement. The law of reinforcement. The law of reinforcement, it is a miracle tool that can be applied to countless situations, including willful defiance and childish irresponsibility. Its effectiveness can extend to whining, temper tantrums, irresponsibility, table manners, social behavior, obnoxious habits, tardiness, and a score of other undesirable behaviors. Now, I believe that what we're going to look at today is probably the most important areas for us to grasp as parents to make sure that we are implementing these laws of reinforcement. And this is probably, in this area, we're going to look at the biggest mistakes that parents make and in training their children. So the law of reinforcement it's very simple. There's no, extremely complicated theology or theories or study necessary to really understand what these laws of reinforcement are. Now, the bottom line is when it comes to the laws of reinforcement, it's a simple rule is that behaviors or things that are seen positively will recur or happen again. And things that are negative or receive negative attention, they are not going to recur or they are not going to be repeated. And, it gives several examples in there, of a kid who's got maybe several baseball bats. And if he has one baseball bat that he is getting good results from, every time he uses that bat, he gets a good, solid hit with the baseball. Other bats, he doesn't get good results. So what bat is that kid going to use? He's going to use the one that he gets the results, the positive results with. So that is what is going to recur. So, contrawise, if a wife makes a meal and her family digs into that meal and man, everybody's going, oh, Mom or honey or whatever, this is the best meal you've ever made in your life. This is unbelievable. And, everyone's going on about it. And then she serves it for company, and company's doing the same thing. Well, you know what? She's going to serve that one over the one that, people are kind of, well, hopefully I'll get through this meal. No compliments, no, she's not more likely to make that meal again. You got a winner, you stick with it. And that's the idea of the law of reinforcement. Whatever brings positive results is going to be what is recurring, is what's going to happen over and over again. So whatever a child uses to bring positive results is what is going to be recurring and recurring and recurring and recurring. And however they get the results that maybe a child is looking for, that's the way they're going to do it. That's the way they're going to use it. That's the way they're going to act. That's the way they're going to behave. And ultimately what we are doing is we are teaching our children the wrong ways of getting results. So we've got to learn what a child should do in order to get the positive results and make sure when they do the positive things, the things that they're supposed to do, that they are aware that that has brought around or brought about positive results. Sometimes, a child's behavior, we'll get into this as we go, will be good. You haven't done anything to provoke or to entice them to act maybe a little better than they have before. You might go out to a shopping mall and you're going, man, Junior is being really good today. They're like this. Usually I get a little problem with them, or usually this happens. You notice that things are going a little better than they normally do, and the child is a little better behaved, maybe not whining, maybe not complaining, maybe not running around as much, and say, you know what, I'm going to reward that behavior. Positively reward that behavior. Maybe they had no idea. Maybe that wasn't their goal, to get, good responses from their parents. But you give them that good reward and that positive response. Therefore, the child is more likely to respond by acting like that, by behaving the way that you want them to behave. So, again, the first thing is positive reinforcement. Now, there are two ways of positively reinforcing a child's behavior, and one of them could be just simply a non-tangible way of doing it, and that may be just a hug or a verbal acknowledgement. Junior, you really acted so good. You did so well. And there were times, I remember when the kids were small, where it would be just like, wow, I would notice one of them, or maybe all of them, would be, exceptional, and I want to do something for you. I want to give you something, or let them know, man, you guys, it was really, I really, really appreciate how you guys, behaved yourself, or how you acted, and how you responded in a certain situation. And you can do that by, again, just simply a hug, praising them, acknowledging it, or you can do it with tangible means, and that may be a gift, taking them out for a meal somewhere to their favorite restaurant, just giving them, maybe a little extra dessert, or giving them a candy, or giving them a cookie, buying them something. And we're going to talk about, that when we get, just in a moment here, when it comes to buying things for children and all of that. So, when we think about these tangible and intangible things, we must be careful that when we're giving them things, that it's not a bribe. Now, do you think it's easy to bribe your children? Right? We've probably all done it, right? We've probably all bribed our children. Now, what would be a situation of bribing? Now, you might be in a shopping mall, and Junior's throwing a temper tantrum, and you're saying, listen, you hear this all the time in shopping malls, where mom or dad is like, they are bribing that kid. If you shut up, and stop screaming and yelling, I'll buy you a chocolate bar. That's bribing. If you do this, then, it's usually a bribe is something that takes place when the negative behavior is taking place. Now, there are, we'll get that first slide up there. There are ways of using tangible, tangible gifts properly. Now, I mentioned, first of all, without the child even knowing, maybe they've just done something really well. They've just acted really good. You were a little worried about how this was going to go because, they had to, really sit still and all of that. I remember it wasn't long after we were saved and in church, and, I call it church training. Justine wasn't maybe as completely church trained as she would have been maybe a little later. She was 4 years old, and Scott and Jody, some folks, Scott's a pastor down in the States, and Jody was our pastor's daughter. They got married, and they decided to have Justine as a flower girl. And you want to talk about a really, really nervous mom and dad. How was Justine going to act, when she's walking down, and, we're just like, hopefully she doesn't, act like her father, or, act like this or act like that. And, we were pretty nervous. And so she got up there, sat down in her chair where she's supposed to. And, of course, she's right in front and center for everybody to see, and we're all like, our eyes are on her, not the bride and groom and all of that. And she decides to start polishing her shoes, and then she's in her basket with her little flower petals, and she's looking at that, and she, just doing little things like that. And then, at the end of it, she walked down, and I thought, man, she did a really, really, really good job. And, And like we even had people come and say, yeah, she did really good. She didn't run off in fear and, or scream and yell or not do what she was supposed to do. And she got rewarded for it. You did a really good job. We praise the Lord, and it was so wonderful. And, kids will do a good job, and reward them for it. Say, you know what, I've got a gift for you. You're not bribing them, but you're rewarding them. And so that's that positive reinforcement. That's where you're teaching them that the positive, right, whatever brings the results is going to be the thing that is repeated or recurs. And so you're teaching them that this is a positive behavior, and they're getting positive results. It's working. So I'm going to continue to do it, right? We're pushing that to be the normal behavior for a child. And, there can also be, for the most part, gifts are something that may come, the child has no idea they're coming. It's just something you've decided at the end of a particular thing or whatever it may be, after a good report card or something, you're just going to buy them something or give them something. That's, again, it's not a bribe, it's a reward. But there's also a time when you can say, well, you will get this, if this takes place. And again, we built a house years ago, and the boys were a little older, at least old enough to help out in certain situations. And so I said to them, you guys help me out and do a good job working together to build this deck in the back of the house, and I'm going to take you to my favorite Chinese buffet, King's Buffet. And so the kids were anxiously working and waiting until we were finally finished and we could head off to King's Buffet. So we went down there, just the boys and I, and we had our meal at King's Buffet. And that is an incentive, and there's nothing wrong with incentives. There's nothing wrong with saying to your child, you know what, if you do this, if you get good grades on your next report card, or if you can get that A, we're going to take you to your favorite restaurant. Maybe you're going to get that new bike, or maybe this will take place. So there's nothing wrong with determining to give them gifts and telling them they may receive a reward as an incentive. But again, son, if you make your bed every day, we're bribing you. You can have a TV, like it says up here. We'll give you something. That a bribe is something that you're using to try to force the behavior, where a gift is something you're trying, or that you give to reward the behavior, good behavior. So, and I think we have a pretty good idea about that, and understanding that, and it talks about an example here. Junior asked for a snack only a short while after finishing supper. Mom refuses and said, listen, you just ate supper. You're going to get a snack later on. The kid keeps whining, and the kid keeps complaining. And Mom, oh my word, I'm going to die. I haven't eaten in 40 minutes, like most kids do. I mean, you don't understand, Mom. I'm pining away. And finally, Mom gives in. Now, what has Mom just done? When it comes to, again, the positive reinforcement and, of course, getting results, right? The child got the results, but what did we teach them about how to get those results? By whining, right? By complaining. Rather than just simply doing what she should have done and said, well, you know what? We will give you a snack maybe in another hour, but, whatever it may be, maybe sometimes you have a set time if a kid wants a snack in the evening when you can have that. But, important making sure that we don't use positive reinforcement to bring about undesirable results, because we can use the positive reinforcement and it's going to bring out undesirable results just like that. Well, that's not what we wanted. And so, again, we must be careful to achieve that, to make sure we have the proper incentives. And then there's negative reinforcement. So those are the positive things. And the positive reinforcement and the negative reinforcement are very important when it comes to, of course, raising our children. And sometimes we can major too much on the negative reinforcement. And that's, the discipline or the punishment, It's easy to mete that out, but sometimes we're not carrying out the positive reinforcement where they're getting rewarded, where they're getting praised for the good behavior. They're only always getting, scolded or disciplined for what they do wrong. So we have to, as parents, make sure that we're praising our kids as much as we're correcting our kids when they do right. And positive reinforcement, I think, is so important. And like even in the workplace, you can have have you ever heard of that, a toxic work environment, right? Where everything is always so negative, and people are just constantly focusing on the negative and the mistakes and not building that positive, work environment. And it's a fact, it's a proven fact that people that are working in a positive work environment will be more productive and have less mistakes and less problems. Again, if instead of constantly bringing the negative out, like using the negative reinforcement to try to improve performance in the workplace, just constantly praise and make sure that they're knowing that they're doing a good job and working positively. So make sure, this is so important, I think, again, to make sure that you're bringing in that positive reinforcement to your kids. Make sure that they're always rewarded for being good, either verbally or otherwise. It's going to, a little child, you think about it, man, hey, this is great. I'm going to act like this more often because it's bringing about positive results, right? I like this. It's better than constantly being in trouble. And, sometimes children are looking for that attention as well. They're looking for that praise and all of that by their parents. So negative reinforcement is withholding. And you might want to look at it that way. It's simply withholding either reward or the application of punishment in a particular situation. And so just as long as, as well as, that positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement is necessary as well. So our response when a child's behavior is wrong, just as often as we need to positively enforce or reinforce good behavior, we must, of course, negatively deal with the wrong behavior and having that balance as well. Parents should recognize desirable behavior, but it can be eliminated by negative reinforcement. So if a child is not rewarded and praised for desirable behavior, that desirable behavior, it may be eliminated because we're not reinforcing it, we're not praising it, we're not rewarding it. And by doing that, we can be eliminating it. And when the child simply gets attention for negative behavior, wrong behavior, it's what's bringing the positive results for the child, because they're getting the attention from their mom and dad, getting acknowledgement. And so parents can mistakenly ignore good behavior and, again, simply focus on the bad behavior. And what we're doing when we do that is we're simply training a child to be a bad child, to be a disobedient child, because all of the focus now gets put on that negative enforcement. So a child, in many cases, who's maybe a good child, right? You might say, well, I've got, a compliant child and I've got a defiant child, And I mentioned this when we went through those types of children. What child is usually going to get the most attention? The defiant child. So little Missy over here, she's the compliant child. She's always, yes, Mom, yes, Dad, doing what she's supposed to do, never argues, never complains, always has a smile on her face. And she sees, Chuck over there, who's always, into mischief and getting in trouble, and he's constantly getting the attention from Mom and Dad. And it can cause a child to begin to disobey and begin to act in a sinful manner simply to get the attention from their parents. So making sure that we're giving even the good children that positive reinforcement, or a good child in their behavior. And that way, again, we're going to be promoting that, because what bat is the child going to go to? The child's going to go to the bat that brings results. And if they're getting the results from that behavior, that's the bat they're going to go to. So some of the things that we're going to look at here that might bring about negative reinforcement is, first of all, whining. And, children can whine. They can whine, and they learn, what will get results, right? They will figure out real quick what button they can press with mom and what button they can press with dad to get what they want. And whining is something that we've got to be careful of. A child should ultimately not be allowed to whine. And they'll learn, if they begin to be rewarded for whining, then they're going to learn that, again, no really means maybe. When mom and dad say no, then the child should know that no really means no. And we did talk about, of course, the appeal. There's an opportunity for a child to appeal if something is denied with a no or whatever it may be. But we're not talking about an appeal here. We're talking about whining, just simply whining. So what we do, unfortunately, and this applies to all of the things we're going to look at, if we reward the child by giving them what they want because they've whined, then we're teaching them that is what you use. That's the tool that you use to get what you want. So guess what you're going to have when they turn 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years old? A big whiner who's been taught all their life that to get what I want, I'm going to whine. So that's what they do. And so again, if a child is whining, maybe it's time to apply some of that negative reinforcement and to eliminate the whining. And that could be either by withholding rewards that we talked about, or it could be, of course, a spanking or whatever it may be. We'll talk about different ways of dealing with certain things in a moment. And the next thing is temper tantrums. And I was telling Kyle, I wanted to get that. I don't know if anybody watches the Andy Griffith show, but Opie and the Spoiled Kid, where this spoiled kid was trying to teach Opie how to get what he wants by having temper tantrums and all this stuff. And so Opie goes in, throws a temper tantrum, and he's flailing on the floor, and Andy just looks at him and said, "Don't get your clothes dirty." Opie's like, "Yeah, man, it's not working," and or they'll hold their breath, or kids will do all kinds of stuff. But I know, again, like I didn't put up with or tolerate temper tantrums, and they certainly shouldn't be. But quite often, kids will learn that they can get what they want if they throw a temper tantrum. We don't want little Johnny upset. We don't want them, crying. So, the illustration here of, they decide to go to a particular restaurant, the family, and little Jimmy decides he doesn't want to go to that restaurant because he doesn't like that food. He wants to go to some greasy spoon, or go to McDonald's where we get a Happy Meal or something, and then he throws a temper tantrum, and mom and dad finally say, "Well, let's just go there because we don't want, little Johnny or Jimmy to be having this temper tantrum." So they're teaching him, again, that's the bat you go to when you want results. And, every time they want things to be done, even as they grow up into adulthood, hey, I want to get something, I want something, I throw a temper tantrum. And you see that, adults doing that all over the place. They don't get what they want, they throw a fit. Hey, well, it worked when I was a kid. Maybe it'll work today. And I was going to say, I think I've seen my prime minister do that, but I'm not going to say that. I think he was a little spoiled. So again, we're doing that. So what should we do? Of course, in a time when there's a temper tantrum, well, you just inform Jimmy or your child that temper tantrums aren't going to be dealt with. They're not going to be tolerated. And so at its onset, not waiting 5 minutes or until you're finally, you've had enough of the temper tantrum. You say, well, I can't take this anymore. This kid's not going to stop. I'm going to go finally deal with it. No, on the onset, you deal with it. You pick them up. You apply discipline, whatever you need to do, the Board of Education to the seat of learning, whatever you need to do. Put him in his room until he's told to come out. And again, you're going to see a change of behavior. And I will tell you this, as you know, for raising 4 kids and everything else, it brings about positive results. It's amazing how their attitude changes. And suddenly, you know, little Jimmy that was throwing a temper tantrum is now more than happy to cooperate and go along and, you know, be good kids, you know, in the restaurant. And I don't want to, you know, talk too much. I know, like, a little bit of, I will use another illustration of my parenting, but I don't know how many times that we were in restaurants, and, you know, it's not just our family or anything like that, but where, Diane will tell you the same thing, where people come up and said, how do you do it? And I said, what do you mean? Like, they said, how do you do it? You got 4 kids in this restaurant, and they're all behaving themselves. You know, and well, you know, this is how I do it. You know, I spank the life out of them, and, you know, whatever. Were my kids perfect? No. Would I perfect? No. But I mean, you know, it brings about results, you know, and doing things God's way. So we'll get the second slide up there. Generally speaking, temper tantrums, they need an audience, right? It's an act. We're all aware of that, right? It's an act. So if a child throws a temper tantrum, take them somewhere where they've got no audience, right? A temper tantrum needs an audience. It's not for the kid, it's for you. So understand that again, it's important that you don't, you know, maybe get upset or anything like that. Just calmly and decisively deal with it. Put them in the room. Apply the discipline, whatever needs to be done. And the experts, of course, in our world, they try to tell us that temper tantrums are normal, should be expected. But studies show that in 1955, only 5% of children between the ages of 2 and 4 threw temper tantrums. But by the mid-1980s, it had risen to 85%. And so why is that? Why is that? Because in the 1950s, parents put up with a child's temper tantrum, it would be dealt with, and they wouldn't do it. But by 1985, it became the normal way for kids to get what they want, because they were getting results. It was the bat they were going to. It was what they were doing. And understanding that. And then there's mealtime misbehavior as well. And there's different ways that children can behave at mealtimes. And one of the illustrations it gives is simply by delaying. And kids can do that. They will learn to control the situation, control mom and dad, control the whole family by simply, you know, again, at mealtime, taking their time in eating. And, you know, I'm going to make everyone sit here because, you know, I think at family mealtime, everyone should leave the table at the same time. You know, junior shouldn't just wolf down their food and leave, right? They should all sit, and everyone should finish, and everyone should leave the table, help to clean up or whatever, you know, at the same time. So, you know, one of the kids can learn, hey, you know what, I can control this by taking my time, and everyone else is waiting. You know, I remember a friend of mine, Brian Traver, apparently he's like the slowest eater in the world. It takes him 45 minutes to eat what would take me about 5 minutes to eat. I remember once we went to Subway, I was done my sub, and he was only like that far into one side of the sandwich. And yeah, I said, yeah, Brian's just a slow eater, you know. And I understand some people just eat slower than others, but you just got to be careful. Sometimes kids can do those sort of things to manipulate, and of course, doing that. So that's the law of reinforcement. The next one is the law of results, and this is, you know, I think it's self-explanatory. There are naturally imposed results for bad behavior. And there may be, of course, imposed results, and that would be discipline by the parents, sending them to their room, with pulling them out of a situation, not allowed to play with the kids in the backyard anymore, whatever it may be. Those would be, again, imposed. But there are certain things that are natural. We'll get number 3 up there. Slide number 3. Little Johnny's told, don't eat those green apples, right? Well, he goes out and eats the green apples, and the next thing you know, he's got stomach aches and all kinds of problems in his stomach. He's learned his lesson, right? So does he need to be disciplined? Maybe he's learned his lesson. Okay, Mom said don't do this, don't do this. I remember when I was a kid, I noticed in my mom and dad's room there was a roll of Tums, and there was green and red and all these really attractive looking, I thought they were candies. So I said, Mom, can I have one of those candies? My mom said, they're not candies, they're medicine. And I said, oh, come on, Mom, you're not fooling me. I didn't fall off the turnip wagon yesterday. She said, Michael, they're medicine. So one day when my mom wasn't around, I went up and stole the Tums and took them outside, and I started eating them and realized real quick that she wasn't kidding, It's like, oh, man, those things are awful. And I learned my lesson, that they weren't very pleasant. And I don't think I got away with just that, by the way. What I did get was unpleasant as well when my mom noticed the Tums missing. But there are natural consequences, and there are certain times when the natural consequence of a disobedient act, may be sufficient. That doesn't mean we don't talk to them and still deal with it, but maybe there's no other punishment that's needed or to be mete out. And then the law of removal. And again, that's what I was saying, like maybe a child isn't playing properly in the backyard with their friends. Well, no, you need to come in. And that's the punishment. You're not going to be out there. If you're not going to play properly, if you're going to be hogging or doing this or lying or cheating in the game or doing whatever, you're not going to be out there, and let them sit in their room and watch out the window. And, that's an effective tool, of course, as well, to do that. So, again, understanding all the different tools, disciplinary tools, there's many of them that God has given us to be able to use them. The rod of correction, the reinforcement, the results, the removal. There's tangible and intangible rewards that we can mete out. And all of those are very important. So we're going to look quickly at the lesson number 19 here, which is controlling your child's behavior. And we'll get number 4 up there, number 4. Slide number 4, and we talked about this before. We've already looked at this slide. And again, realizing that from 0 to 12, this is the area when a parent needs to gain control of their children, because if they try to do it around the age of 12 or 14 years old, it's going to be very difficult. So as a child grows up, gets to be about 12, you should already have control, and then that's when the training comes in. That's when you should simply be training. And a lot of, maybe by that time, a lot of discipline is unnecessary. And again, as a child grows older into their teens and into adulthood, then your role becomes more of a training or teaching. So you're going from control to training to teaching. And we'll get the number 5 slide up there, Kyle. And we must understand, when it comes to controlling our child, the necessity as we think about control with a young child, training and respect with a preteen, and then, of course, into the teaching. Every child is born with a sinful nature, and I've mentioned this before. We don't have to teach our children to lie, steal, cheat. Have you? Has anybody here? I've never found an exception to that. Did you ever have to teach them to be selfish? Teach them to lie? No, they're born that way. So when we think about that area of control, it's so important, and we have restrictions, around our children when they're younger. And when they're young, really young, it's a very small area that they have of freedom. And of course, as they get older, it opens up and broadens up until, again, we see that as they're given more and more responsibility. You wouldn't give a 3-year-old the keys to the car and tell him to drive downtown, grab you some milk from the store, right? But when they get older, you can give them that responsibility and open up that window of freedom where they're allowed to expand. I remember as a kid, some kids, we were playing and we said, well, let's go over there. And they said, I can't. I'm not allowed to cross that highway. I said, well, I'll carry you. Whatever, they have boundaries, right? There were boundaries, certain things you're supposed to do or not do. And again, those responsibilities are imposed as they get older, given to the child, and as they show responsibility. So, to control, there must be rules, and there must be reasonable rules as well. You can't give a 3-year-old the keys to your car, no more than you can, expect a 15-year-old to still be in diapers and, eating pablum, right? So you have to make sure you're giving the proper responsibilities. What would happen? Let me ask you this question. What would happen if you just left your 4-year-old, okay, I'm going to do like, the world says, and, not be a parent to my children. I'm just going to let my 4-year-old every day decide what they're going to eat, what they're going to eat for themselves. They're going to dress themselves. They can just wander, do whatever they want. No rules, no responsibilities, no control. We're not going to dress them. We're not going to feed them. They're just going to put on whatever they want to put on every day. How would that go? How long will your child survive if you said, no, you got to make your own meals? They wouldn't know what to eat, and if they did, it would only be candy, right? So we understand that. That's why when a child is smaller, we, of course, have to have more control. But as they get older, you got to give them more responsibility. And this is an area that you need to be careful, because sometimes the oldest child can get all the responsibility, the youngest child can get babied. And the middle child, they just get kicked around. And, you've got to make sure as the child is older, as the child gets older, the responsibilities should be given. More responsibilities. You can't just keep saying, well, your older sister is going to do that, or your older brother. Well, wait a minute. I remember my brother was allowed to take the car when he was 17, wherever he wanted. When I was 17, I was never old enough, There were certain things like that. I couldn't do it, but they could, or whatever it may be. But giving them, responsibilities that they're able to deal with. And there was one particular time when the kids were younger, I failed miserably. And I think I still apologize occasionally for it, but I felt about as bad as I could ever feel in my life, and I apologized profusely at the time. But one of the kids was helping me put together a trampoline. And so I can't remember, the child was about 8 or 9 years old, I can't remember exactly about there. And all of a sudden this big gust of wind grabbed that trampoline, flipped it over, and it looked like a Pringles chip. It looked like, it was literally all warped. And I got mad at that the child. You weren't holding it the way I told you to hold it, and I was upset. And a few minutes later, I said, "What did I just do?" I mean, that's responsibility. I cannot blame that child for the wind grabbing that thing and flipping it over. Like, you hang on to it. You're only 80 pounds or 50 pounds or whatever. And I thought, man, I just gave that kid way too much. Put too much on his shoulders, and so I acted horribly, and I never should have done that, and it was simply an accident to begin with, by the wind grabbing it and all of that, and I still feel bad about it, even just talking about it. But we've got to make sure. My point is that we don't give our child responsibilities they're not willing to deal with, or they can't handle yet. And then we go and get mad at them or discipline them for not carrying out the instructions that we gave them. And like I said, even with cutting the grass or something, the little junior's finally, 12 years old or whatever it may be, old enough to cut the grass, or no set age, whatever, it's the child's maturity or whatever it may be, and you go out there and you look at the grass, and it's like, what in the world happened out there? It looks like a maze. And get all upset at the child. They're not going to cut it as well as you. They're going to miss areas and whatever else. So making sure that you're doing that. And then proportional penalties as well. As the sin or the disobedience or whatever it may be, so should the the penalty be, or the discipline. And no matter what, though, as it says here, the pain should equal the pleasure of the disobedience or the sin. And act consistently as well. And, again, there's no perfect parent that's going to act consistently every time, but it will help if you do act consistently. Like I said, don't let your child ever begin to throw a temper tantrum. Deal with it immediately, and if you do that, you'll nip it in the bud rather than, wait for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And sometimes, when our kids were little, if they were asked to do something or whatever it may be, and there was delay, I would start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and every time, that would be, you figure it out. And so they maybe that was wrong, I don't know, but they would learn, I better get this done quick, right? or do what I'm told to do. So again, the discipline should be meet to the sin that was committed. Being consistent, act consistently as well. And something that deserved discipline one day should deserve discipline the next day. One thing that's dealt with one day should still be dealt with the next day. I just don't feel like it today, or I'm in a bad mood today, or I got so many things to do today, or I just can't deal with it today. And we'll get the next slide up there. I think it's number 6. Don't argue with your kids either. We're not negotiating. A family is not a democracy, right? And so many families, they almost act like it's a democracy today. Well, we've got to have a little meeting and ask our kids permission. That's child-centered parenting. It's not a democracy, right? You don't argue with your child. And you just give you 5 good reasons why you should obey me, right? Don't let them train you, and that's what ultimately they're doing. They're training you. So don't allow a child to make excuses for disobedience or wrongdoing as well. And boy, children can come up with the greatest excuses to disobey. And they'll even come up with very ingenious ideas how to purposely do something, to make sure that they can't do what they've been asked to do or whatever it may be. Don't, and this is, I think, more important than anything, don't verbally abuse your child. Again, yelling. I think yelling, they should be arresting parents for anything. They should be yelling at their children and belittling their children. And you see that all the time because the world has taken away, or tried to take away, the tools that God has given us. So they use other means to try to, bribery and everything else to try to get their kids to obey. And they yell at them and scream at them. And I've seen so many parents over the years frustrated with kids that won't behave in supermarkets, and they're just absolutely destroying that kid, And you can't tell me it doesn't affect the kid, especially when they start getting, up around 7 or 8 years old. You're destroying that child, calling them names like stupid or lazy, or again, any sort of degrading is very important. We got to get rid of that, and then eliminate rebellion as well. Very important to make sure that the children don't have a rebellious heart, talking back, refusing to answer, walking or running away. And a child just doesn't leave a conversation with a parent until the conversation's over. You just don't walk away, different things like that. Very important as well. So the greatest hindrances to establishing control are failing to sacrifice time, and we'll get the next slide up, number 7 there. I think this is so indicative sometimes, Butch is being a bad boy. Why don't you send him to his room, dear? And he says, well, why don't you? And ultimately, I think the father's responsibility is the disciplinarian, and of course the mother, if the father's not around, I think, she has deputized to carry out the discipline or whatever it may be, but ultimately I think the father needs to be that authority figure in the home. But it's easy to just shirk our responsibilities when there's misbehavior because we don't want to put time into it. We just don't want to face the inevitable conflict because we know, especially with this child, it's going to be drama, or it's going to be a long time dealing with this, and it's not just going to be a simple process. Make sure that you're willing to face the consequences and deal with it, because I promise you it will get easy, or should I say easier, when the child knows that they're not going to win. And we could be a lack of character to persevere, fear of being wrong, and this is, of course, a big thing. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to do the wrong thing or act the wrong way. And another one, fear of rejection as well. A lot of parents will fail to deal with their child because they're afraid their child is going to reject them. And, even a child may explore, I hate you, or, I don't love you, or whatever, you're mean, or you're whatever. Thank you. I just appreciate that, because that's what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to be mean, so I'm glad I'm achieving my goal, and but don't be afraid of rejection, because I ultimately believe that children, whether we want to believe it or not, they need discipline. They know they do. And I think they are, sometimes, don't get me wrong here when I say they ask for it, but they want it. They want to be corrected. They're looking for their parents to teach them and to correct them. And that's their job, and that's the child's, I think, responsibility. So there's an area here, we're not going to get into it, but it's called getting started. And everything that we've dealt with when it comes to controlling your children, and teaching them to behave and all of that. Maybe you've never implemented this. Maybe it's brand new. But I think you should read that, Getting Started, and make sure that you understand. Because, again, like any tool, any of these tools can be used wrong. And we've got to make sure we're using that positive reinforcement, the negative reinforcement, the discipline properly, all of those things. Make sure we're doing it properly. So we don't really have any time, but is there any questions? Any questions about anything we've looked at? Okay, well, if you do have questions afterwards, don't be afraid to ask. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for this time together. Bless as we go into the morning service. And again, help each one, no matter what stage of life we're in, to be all that we can be as parents for your glory. We thank you and love you in Jesus' name, and amen.